pain about me leaving, that's a you thing. That's yours to carry. That's not mine. And I think for a lot of times, a lot of years, I was trying to take the blame.
For more than a decade, Meri Brown waited in the wings, dignified, poised, and silently bearing what millions of viewers speculated but never proved. As cameras rolled and captured everything from family dinners and scripted sit-downs to the random explosive confession, everything that really went on behind those closed doors was a locked safe. Until now, the day started like any other, with a scheduled appearance at a women's empowerment conference in Salt Lake City. No one anticipated what would unfold on stage, not even Meri's close friends. Dressed in an elegant yet understated navy blue dress, Meri took the podium, her voice initially soft, trembling slightly as she addressed the crowd. What started as a talk on personal resilience quickly turned into something far more powerful, something devastating. "I have kept this to myself for too long," she started, her voice watery but firm. "Not out of lack of courage, but because I was taught to think that silence was virtuous." And that was when the room dropped into a thick silence. She explained quiet beginnings, little things, gaslighting remarks, the increasing solitude. Kody's dominance didn't start with screaming. No, it began with absence, with manipulation, with letting her know she didn't exist unless he wanted something. By the time the audience caught on to what was happening, most had tears streaming down their faces. Meri wasn't making a speech, she was testifying. What followed would ripple through their entire family legacy, through courtrooms, TLC contracts, and most tragically, through Meri's own memories. And this was only the beginning. Meri had been edited for years as the stoic wife, the one who held it together while the family fell apart before the cameras. TLC edited her as the quiet presence, the peacemaker, the one who chose to stay even when it was obvious she was hurting. But in her address, she depicted quite another, not only of herself, but of a family system founded on secrecy and guilt, on power relationships. She described how, early on, Kody's words started eating away at her self-worth, not shouting or cruel, but being excluded from decisions. Being told this is for the family when in actuality it was for him and Robin. Being gaslighted into believing she was selfish for needing affection, for time, for truth. "It's difficult to put how little you begin to feel," Meri said. "It's not one moment, it's 1,000. And she didn't stop there. She talked about silent punishments, weeks at a time when Kody would just refuse to come to her house. Holidays came and went without visits, phone calls not returned. He would tell me every time that it was my fault. She disclosed that I'd done something to deserve it, that I wasn't supportive enough." The audience gasped in audible shock. This wasn't tabloid rumor now. This was first-hand evidence. The secret abuse wasn't just about control, but about using absence as a weapon, withholding attention, affection, and even financial provision to maintain her in line. As her voice became stronger, she began to allude to emails, text messages, and journal entries she had stored. "For years," she explained, "I wrote down everything. I didn't know why then. Maybe I was holding out for this moment." And that suggestion that there were receipts caused a shiver of electricity through the room. She wasn't just talking. She was about to substantiate it. The conference hall was still. No one moved. As Meri paused to take a sip of water, the silence was deafening, not of boredom, but of breath held. She had just suggested that she kept a paper trail, a digital archive, a truth that lived behind passwords and encryption keys. Now, she was ready to bring it into the light. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small flash drive. It glittered under the spotlight. "This," she said softly, "holds the truth they never wanted aired." Gasps broke across the room like glass shattering on tile. Meri looked tired, but she didn't flinch. The messages she described weren't threats in the traditional sense. No curses, no yelling. But they were cutting, cold, calculated. "When you stop being useful, there's no place for you here." One message read, allegedly sent by Kody after a failed counseling session. Another message dismissed her emotional plea as manipulation. And yet another, more chilling, "You can leave quietly, or let the show make it messy." She had screenshots, dated, time-stamped, backed up, But it wasn't just about Kody. She hinted at a pattern, a culture within the family where silence was rewarded and resistance was met with emotional exile. She said producers knew, assistants knew. At times, even the children knew and looked away out of fear of being next. The abuse, as she framed it, wasn't physical. It was psychological warfare wrapped in faith, contracts, and fear of public shame. And finally, for the first time, Meri said the words out loud. This wasn't just a toxic marriage. It was a controlled environment, and I was emotionally imprisoned. It wasn't just confession. It was accusation. And the fallout was only just beginning. As Meri's truth echoed through the crowd, a pattern began to emerge, not just in her words, but in how everything had been building toward this moment for years. To the casual viewer, the warning signs were subtle, buried under polite smiles and heavily edited confessionals. But those who watched closely, who saw the way her eyes darted away when Kody spoke, how she seemed to shrink during group scenes, realized this wasn't sudden. It was cumulative. Meri described how her intuition tried to alert her long ago. I would walk into a room and suddenly feel invisible, she said. Conversations would pause when I entered. Plans were made without me. And when I asked why, I was told I was being dramatic. Over time, she learned to second-guess herself, to apologize even when she hadn't done anything wrong, and when she tried to address it, she was told it was her energy, her jealousy, her negativity, never his behavior. What cut deepest, Meri admitted, wasn't Kody's detachment. It was how the other wives began to subtly shift, taking cues from his mood. If I was out of favor with him, I was isolated by all. Even her own child began to sense the cracks, questioning why their home felt so tense and quiet. There were moments, glimmers, where she tried to leave. She packed bags, she looked at apartments, she even met with a lawyer once. But fear always brought her back. Fear of public backlash, fear of financial instability, and the most paralyzing of all, fear of not being believed. Because when emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises, Meri said, you become your only witness. But that would soon change because the evidence she had gathered would bring others to the stand. As Meri continued her story, a shift occurred in the room. Her voice, once trembling, had found its rhythm. She wasn't just sharing memories anymore, she was building a case. And for the first time, the crowd understood why the networks, the production crew, and even some fans never saw the full truth, because it was easier not to. I tried to speak up during filming, Meri admitted, her jaw tightening. More than once, she recounted instances where she confided in producers, expressing emotional distress and asking for support, or at the very least, for space to explain her side. But each time, she was met with deflection. They told me it wouldn't fit the narrative, that fans wanted hope, not heartbreak. In a chilling admission, she described how a particular scene, one where she gently confronted Kody about his prolonged absence, was cut almost entirely. You saw 3 minutes, she said, but the original conversation lasted over an hour. She was told it was too raw, that viewers might not understand, or worse, that it would reflect poorly on the family brand. It was clear now. Silence wasn't just encouraged, it was edited. And then came the moment that turned everything. Meri revealed that in season 16, a specific producer pulled her aside during filming and allegedly said, you signed up for this. If you want a different story, write a book. She paused after sharing that quote, letting it land, and then, with a calm, measured tone, she added, this is my book, and I'm reading it out loud, whether they like it or not. The weight of Meri's words wasn't just shaking the public, it was beginning to fracture the foundation of the very family she'd helped build. While Meri didn't call out the other wives directly, the implications were impossible to ignore. Her confession stirred a tsunami of emotion, not just from supporters in the audience, but also from within the family. She explained how, slowly, alliances began to form in secret. Christine, for a time, offered quiet compassion, sensing something wasn't right but never fully breaking rank. Janelle, Meri revealed, had moments of solidarity, late-night texts, knowing glances, but stopped short of challenging Kody directly. And Robin, Meri paused, voice lower now. Was the enforcer. The air shifted in the auditorium. She would gently remind me that I was causing problems. That if I just trusted Kody, things would improve. But Meri saw through it. These weren't attempts to help, they were rehearsed lines, passed down like script notes. It became clear that dissent wasn't just discouraged, it was erased. Meri described holidays where she wasn't invited, family group chats she was removed from, and a chilling Christmas Eve where no one came to her house, not even Kody. It was as if I had been erased while still living inside the frame. She wasn't just cast aside by her husband. She was systematically isolated by the entire unit. And now, as her story spread beyond that conference room, it wasn't just the audience listening. The other wives were watching too, and the silence from them would be deafening. Just when it seemed Meri had said it all, she dropped a revelation that left the entire room stunned. Her voice softened, but her words hit harder than ever. There was a moment I stopped recognizing myself. I would look in the mirror and not see Meri. I saw a shadow. And one day, I wrote a goodbye letter. Gasps, audible sobs. Some covered their mouths in shock. Meri explained that during the lowest point in her emotional isolation, she had quietly written a letter to her daughter. It wasn't a suicide note, but it was something just as heartbreaking. A farewell to the idea that she mattered. A final explanation of why she felt unseen, unheard, and emotionally abandoned in a family she helped build. I never sent it, she said, voice trembling, but I kept it. And every time I doubted myself, I would read it. Not because it gave me strength, but because it reminded me how far I had fallen. Then came the most gut-wrenching confession of all. There were nights I'd sleep fully dressed, waiting to hear the knock at the door, hoping Kody would come, that someone would come. And most nights, no one did. The audience sat in silence. No phones, no whispers, just collective heartbreak. Meri paused, then added, "And if you're wondering why I never left, it's because when your world is built on emotional crumbs, even silence feels like a meal." This wasn't just a woman revealing trauma. This was a survivor reclaiming her narrative piece by painful piece. Meri's voice changed in part 8. It wasn't just a retelling of pain anymore, it was a declaration of awakening. After showing the goodbye letter and recounting those long nights of waiting for a knock that never came, she leaned forward and spoke with a firmness that silenced the entire room. I realized one day, silence wasn't protecting me. It was protecting them. That was the moment she began documenting everything with intention. She took screenshots of texts, saved voicemails, and even recorded dates and times when Kody failed to show up for scheduled visits. She also quietly began confiding in a small circle of friends and a therapist, building a network of witnesses who could corroborate her experience. She recounted the day she discovered the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet humiliation. Kody, she said, had used a family meeting to announce decisions about the show and finances, decisions made entirely without her input, and when she tried to speak, he cut her off and said in front of everyone, "You're no longer part of this core." It was then that she realized her compliance had bought her nothing. Her silence had only enabled a system that thrived on her absence. "That's the day I stopped asking for a seat at the table," Meri said, "and started building my own." The crowd erupted into applause for the first time. Meri took a long breath. This wasn't just a confession anymore. It was a shift from victim to witness, from witness to whistleblower, and what came next would show just how far she was willing to go to make sure no one could erase her story again.